From London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. China asks the United Nations top court to speak out on what it says is unlawful Israeli occupation. Rafah bombarded. Israeli attacks destroyed dozens of homes in what residents say was one of the worst nights yet of the conflict, as diplomatic efforts intensify to prevent a ground assault. With the conflict in Ukraine entering its third year, we travel on the train lines, still connecting loved ones across the country. And foreign ministers at a G20 meeting in Brazil condemn Russia's top diplomat over aggression in Ukraine. China says it fully supports a two-state solution for the settlement of the Israel-Palestine conflict. On the fourth day of hearings at the International Court of Justice about Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories, China's representative said that establishing peace between Israel and Palestine was a core responsibility of the United Nations. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Julia Chapman, who is in The Hague. So, Julia, what has China said at the hearing?
China's representative called this moment a litmus test for the collective conscience of humanity, and he laid out the arguments as to why China believes that the Palestinians have a right to self-determination and why China believes that Israel is infringing upon that right. He said that right extends to fighting against occupation, something he said under international law is distinct from terror attacks, but he did acknowledge that Israel has a right to self-defense. He just said that had to be proportionate. And Mr. Ma urged the court to come to an advisory opinion, saying it would help pave the way for the restoration of the peace process. Here's what he had to say.
China encourages both parties to accommodate each other's legitimate concerns, embrace the vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative and sustainable security, continue negotiating for peaceful settlement, and work toward two states coexisting in peace and two peoples living side by side in harmony.
And what have the other representatives been saying?
Well, throughout the week, we've been hearing from nearly 50 countries now. There will be more than 50 by the end of the week. It was all kicked off by the Palestinians on Monday, outlining what they say have been decades of repression at the hands of the Israelis, something they called apartheid. We heard from South Africa, which, of course, put forward a claim against Israel for genocide in a separate case, with the same court urging Israel to prevent any kind of genocide in Gaza. We've heard Russia urging Israel to end what it called collective punishment in Gaza, France calling on Israel to comply with international law. And then yesterday we heard from the United States, which took Israel's side, defending its ally and insisting that the court needed to consider Israel's security in all of this as well. That was a sentiment that was echoed by Hungary. Who we've not heard from, however, is the Israelis, at least not in person. They've submitted a statement dismissing the very premise of the questions being put to the judges at the ICJ, and they say that any kind of advisory opinion from this court could harm the outcome of any kind of negotiated settlement between Israelis and Palestinians.
Julia, thank you very much. Our correspondent Julia Chapman in The Hague. In Gaza, Rafah has come under intense bombardment, with Israeli strikes killing more than 90 people overnight. Residents say it was one of their worst nights yet, with dozens of homes destroyed. More than 1 million people are sheltering in southern Gaza after fleeing fighting in the north. Israel has signalled some progress in ceasefire negotiations, adding to hopes that a full-scale ground assault can be prevented. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Akram Al-Satari, who is in Rafah. So, Akram, talk us through what's happened with these latest attacks.
Like you have rightly said, that was a very long and violent night for the Gazans who were taking shelter in Rafah, who were hoping they would stay safe. However, they have been extremely worried about the looming ground operation and have been interpreting any kind of a bombardment in any area of Rafah as indication of a ground operation. Rafah lost today 19 people, while the over Gaza Strip lost around 132. So it's a continuous of the policy of targeting and destruction and killing, and they see in that as an imminent indication of the looming ground operation. People in Rafah, in particular, more than 1 million people, every single time they are hearing the bombardment, they are extremely terrified. They leave their tents, they run in the streets, they expect something major to happen to them, and this is how they have been living about the looming ground operation. Now the bombardment that took place, like you rightly said, was targeting dozens of homes, but also targeted several mosques in the area and central area, which is also an indicative of a plan that is being executed with an objective of the Israeli army to destroy as many infrastructures as possible. So the Palestinians in Rafah see in that as a continuation of the policy of preparing for the ground operation, while people in Gaza at large are still seeing more death and destruction because of the ongoing bombardment all over the Gaza Strip.
Akram, thank you very much. Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari in Rafah. At least one person has been killed and several others injured in a shooting in the West Bank. Let's go to Israel now and talk to our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Sarah Coates. So, Sarah, what's happened in this attack and what's been the response from the government?
Robin, it happened during the very busy morning commute. According to security sources, these three Palestinian men arrived in two different cars on this road known as Route 1, which connects West Bank settlements to Jerusalem. They then exited the vehicles, opening fire with machine guns on a number of cars that were trying to pass through a checkpoint. We do know, as you said, one person dead, 5 others injured, while 5 further people were treated at the scene for shock. Israeli authorities are now raiding an area just near Bethlehem, a Palestinian village. This is where these 3 men reportedly come from, and they have reportedly detained a number of people in that village. Now, in the wake of that attack, there's been a furious response from Israel's far right. The National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, he visited the scene shortly after. He said that the right to life of Jewish residents of Judea and Samaria outweighs the right to freedom of movement of the residents of the Palestinian Authority, also pledging to provide more weapons to Israeli citizens. Also, the Finance Minister, Bezalel Smotrich, he is now demanding that the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, push through plans, push through these hopes that more settlement housing will be developed in the West Bank.
And Sarah, there seems to have been some progress on ceasefire negotiations. What's the latest we've heard from Israeli leaders?
Hebrew media is now reporting, quoting senior Israeli officials as saying that an Israeli delegation may be on its way to Paris tomorrow to pick up these talks that we saw a couple of months ago that included the CIA chief, also the Qatari Prime Minister, the Egyptian spy chief, and this would, of course, include the head of the Mossad, David Barnea. Apparently, the Israelis are now waiting to see these talks today that are actually happening in Cairo with Hamas and whether Hamas softens its stance before making the decision on whether to send this delegation. But we have heard from the War Cabinet member Benny Gantz. Here's what he said on the issue just yesterday.
There
are attempts to reach a new agreement, and there are signs that indicate the possibility of moving forward. We won't stop looking for a way and won't miss any opportunity to bring our people home. The battlefield is facing an operation in Rafah that will begin after the evacuation of the population. The importance of the operation in Rafah is to hit Hamas militants and demilitarize Gaza.
And the US Mideast envoy Brett McGurk is now here on the ground in Israel. He's meeting with the Prime Minister Netanyahu, other senior officials about these negotiations, about potentially bringing the war to an end and getting these hostages back, with a War Cabinet meeting slated for a little later tonight. Robin.
Sarah, thank you very much. Our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. Top advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin has signalled that Moscow could again try and capture Ukraine's capital. Dmitry Medvedev says that for Russia to achieve all its military goals, its troops may one day push on to Kyiv. It comes after a failed attempt to seize the city early in the conflict. The former Russian Prime Minister and ex-president also says that Moscow wants to take the Black Sea port of Odessa. In Ukraine, a train line connecting the capital to the east of the country has been busy carrying soldiers to the battlefield. As the conflict between Russia and Ukraine enters its third year, the journey has become a familiar route for many. Our correspondent Megumi Lim reports.
At 6 a.m, this railway station in Kyiv is already bustling, especially on this platform from where an intercity train takes passengers to the east of the country. Many are in military attire, hours away from returning to the front lines. The final stop is Kramatorsk, a key hub for the Ukrainian army.
The Kyiv-Kramatorsk train line has become one of the busiest train routes in Ukraine. Most of the passengers are soldiers or the loved ones of soldiers. It's a 7-hour journey, making it the fastest connection from the capital to the war-torn east.
Rail services were disrupted during the early days of the conflict, but with air travel still suspended, passenger numbers have returned to their usual levels. Close to 25 million people used the railway last year. On board this train, soldiers get their final peaceful snooze. For many, with no end in sight to the conflict, breaks don't come very often.
I want to see my family. That is the most important thing. When there is at least a day, it's enough time to go home and see them.
Vast landscapes emerge as the train crosses the heart of the country known for its grain and sunflower fields, scenes that have become familiar for the loved ones of soldiers. Milana, who is going to see her husband, spends this time thinking about their future.
My husband and I are planning to have a child, and I hope that it will be born in a free Ukraine without any war. This small blanket is for our future child.
But for others like Mariana, this journey is a first. She decided to volunteer as a translator for foreign medics treating Ukrainian soldiers.
Of course, I donate, I spread the information, I try to do as much as I can as a civilian, but it's different. I feel guilty at some point not doing more.
The journey itself does not come without risks. The Kramatorsk railway station was struck by a missile in April of 2022. This is why Olena has left her children behind as she travels to meet their father, who is serving as a medic's driver.
He doesn't really let me come either, but this is all that I'm asking for. I say, please, if you have a chance, let me know so I can come. But as for the children, he says that not even for a moment should they be brought here.
As the conflict between Russia and Ukraine enters its third year, a sense of fatigue hangs over the country. And with additional funding from the US stalled, the fight has become more difficult. But those on the front lines don't have the luxury of slowing down. Volodymyr is rushing back to the battlefield after spending Valentine's Day with his girlfriend.
It is mentally very difficult. We went through good physical training, but it's difficult mentally to be there all the time. But we cannot give up. There is no way back, because our families, loved ones and children are counting on us.
Although the conflict has torn families apart, this is the train that keeps them connected. Megumi Lim, CGTN, on the train to Kramatorsk, Ukraine.
China says Europe is welcome to share its market opportunities and to benefit from the country's development. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning made the remark after Foreign Minister Wang Yi completed his trip to Europe. Mao says China hopes to work with Europe to deepen cooperation in areas including the economy, energy and artificial intelligence. A container ship has collided with a bridge in the Chinese city of Guangzhou, killing 5 people. Local authorities say that crew error caused the ship to ram into the bridge structure, knocking 4 vehicles and 1 electric motorcycle off the roadway. 2 injured people are being treated in hospital. The ship owner has been detained. Hospitals in South Korea are delaying or cancelling surgeries as a mass strike by doctors enters its 3rd day. It's reported that 5 of the biggest hospitals in the capital Seoul have cancelled up to a third of planned surgeries, including caesarean sections and radiotherapy for cancer patients. The government has threatened to arrest those responsible for the walkout. Doctors are protesting over plans to expand the number of students admitted to medical schools. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Western diplomats bristle at Russia's foreign minister and the G20. We're in Brazil next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. China asks the United Nations top court to speak out on what it says is unlawful Israeli occupation. Rafah bombarded. Israeli attacks destroyed dozens of homes in what residents say was one of the worst nights of the conflict yet, as diplomatic efforts intensify to prevent a ground assault. Russia's foreign minister has faced criticism from Western diplomats at a meeting of the G20 in Brazil. Foreign ministers from the world's largest economies are in Rio de Janeiro for the two-day event. Our correspondent Paulo Cabral is there. So, Paulo, what's been discussed so far?
That's right, and one of the highlights was just what you brought here. Let me give you some context. We are here at the press room of the G20 foreign ministers meeting. We do not have a lot of direct access to what's being said there and the meetings of the foreign ministers because it's all behind closed doors, but we do get to talk to diplomats that hang around here so we can get a bit of a sense of what's happening in there. And yes, certainly one of the highlights was this tension between the Foreign Minister of the United Kingdom, David Cameron, the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov. So from the reports we have, David Cameron did accuse directly to Lavrov's face that he was responsible for the killing of Navalny in Russia. And what we have also reported from there is that Lavrov avoided to look at David Cameron, avoided his gaze, and actually was just with his cell phone and smartphone kind of checking something while Cameron was making this serious accusations of murder against the Russian government. And then after that, Cameron also talked to British media here, and he said that also France, Canada and Germany also used their spaces to talk about Russia and to say that Russia was responsible for this murder. At this time to speak, Sergei Lavrov also defended his country from such charges, from such accusations, but not making any direct reference to what David Cameron had said earlier. And an information just in, we have also the information that Minister Lavrov, foreign minister from Russia, will have a meeting with President Lula da Silva today, later today, in Brasilia, not here in Rio de Janeiro where the G20 meeting is happening, but in Brazil's capital, Brasilia.
And these talks are meant to set the agenda for the full G20 meeting in November, aren't they? What can we expect then?
That's right. You know, it's interesting because actually on the first day of the meeting yesterday, the theme was global security, which is not, let's say, formally one of the usual concerns of the G20. It's not within the axis, the key priorities of discussion for this year. The theme for today is global governance, institutions, and how they can be reformed. And this is, yes, one of the key themes of the G20 this year. The others are social inclusion as means of fighting poverty and hunger, and the other one, sustainability, mainly to combat climate change, and the third one, global governance institutions. So this is what's likely to happen. These themes will be discussed here. This is the first presidential meeting of this G20 cycle. You know that the actual summit is going to happen in November, also here in Rio de Janeiro, and we have to see how these discussions will lead to that. But one interesting aspect is that actually global security is not part of the key themes, but something we have heard clearly from President Lula and from Brazilian Minister Mauro Vieira, for example, is that it's not possible to separate these dimensions. What they say is that global security is tied to social inclusion, to global governance, and also to sustainability. So there's not really a way to separate this dimension. So this is the kind of tone that you're seeing being set here in this G20 meeting, leading up then to the summit in November.
Paulo Cabral in Rio, thank you very much. Dozens of people are feared dead after an illegal gold mine collapsed in Venezuela. The open pit-style Julio Loca mine is in a remote jungle area. More than 100 injured survivors were taken to the nearest hospital 740 kilometres away. Relief teams and rescue workers have been sent to the mine. US President Joe Biden has announced the cancellation of $1.2 billion of student loan debt as he seeks re-election in November. The move only applies to those who've been making payments for at least 10 years and who originally borrowed $12,000 or less. 150,000 ex-students are expected to benefit. The plan aims to help those with low incomes from large families. A privately owned spacecraft is on track to make history as it attempts to land on the moon after a week-long voyage. The six-legged robot lander named Odysseus was built by a Texas-based company and is currently in lunar orbit. If successful, it would be the first US moon landing since Apollo 17, more than 50 years ago. US Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley says she believes that frozen embryos created through IVF are babies. The former UN ambassador was reacting to the ruling by the Alabama Supreme Court that embryos are children. The court's decision will have far-reaching consequences for people wanting a baby through freezing embryos and undergoing in vitro fertilization, or IVF. Our correspondent Poppy Mputi reports.
The Alabama Supreme Court ruling that frozen embryos are children under state law is another step back for reproductive rights in the U.S. In the majority 7-2 decision made by the all-Republican court, Justice Jay Mitchell wrote, "Unborn children are children, without exception based on developmental stage, physical location, or any other ancillary characteristics." With frozen embryos considered children, this decision has far-reaching impacts for Alabama families undergoing IVF to have a child. IVF often requires the harvesting of many eggs from a woman, then fertilizing them to create multiple embryos. Typically, one embryo is implanted at a time, while the others are frozen for later use or discarded. Under the Alabama ruling, experts are worried about liability. The state's largest healthcare provider, the University of Alabama at Birmingham, has already suspended its IVF program. In a statement to CGTN, spokesperson Hannah Eccles said, "We are saddened that this will impact our patients' attempt to have a baby through IVF. But we must evaluate the potential that our patients and our physicians could be prosecuted criminally." The issue of reproductive rights is highly divisive in the U.S. In terms of the political map, conservative Republican states tend to swing anti-abortion, while majority Democrat states mostly back women's rights to make decisions on reproductive health. However, some Republican states have seen backlash at the ballot box, with voters choosing to support abortion rights measures. Activists on both sides of the argument often go head-to-head in the streets. And in the courts, especially since 2022, when the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade decision that protected a woman's right to an abortion. Advocates and politicians who support reproductive rights have been sounding the alarm ever since about the potential domino effects now playing out in individual states. Poppy and Puting, CGTN, Washington.
The headlines again. China asks the United Nations top court to speak out on what it says is unlawful Israeli occupation. Rafah bombarded. Israeli attacks destroyed dozens of homes in what residents say was one of the worst nights of the conflict yet, as diplomatic efforts intensified to prevent a ground assault. And foreign ministers at a G20 meeting in Brazil condemn Russia's top diplomat over aggression in Ukraine. And that is The World Today. Thanks for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hello and welcome to Europe's weather forecast. There could be extensive precipitation across the continent for next 2 days. Friday, you could notice light to moderate rainfall building up across Iberian Peninsula into much of western, central, and all the way down to parts of southern Europe. Meanwhile, the sleet, light to moderate snow could be expected in parts of Scandinavia into western Russia. Then getting to Saturday, you could notice the snowy weather in parts of Scandinavia gradually turn into a chance of sleet. Temperature-wise, the daily highs across much of the east down to parts of the Balkans will continue to go upward for next 2 days. And back to the west, the cold air will continue to push eastward, driving down the temperatures both in the north and down to the south. And your business and travel outlook Saturday, you could have 5 for daily highs in Copenhagen, light rain turning to sleet, and 7 to -2 for Stockholm, even colder for Helsinki, only 4 for daily highs. Minsk, Kiev, you're going to have around a 10 for daily highs. Moving to Moscow, you could have 2 to 1 a chance of sleet. Back to Western Europe's due rain chances for London and Paris with daily highs around a 10, 13 to 2 for Madrid, light rainfall. Please keep your umbrellas handy.